You're listening to the Plastic Shift Podcast. Welcome to the Plastic Shift Podcast. I'm Eileen Farnood, one of the students of the Plastic Shift, and I'm reaching out to several experts working to solve issues with plastic pollution. This podcast showcases unique perspectives on this problem to identify what its most important aspects are. Today I'm joined by Professor Pierre Failler, a professor of economics at the University of Portsmouth and the director of the Center for Blue Governance. He holds a PhD in economics, a master's in economics of marine resources, and a master in philosophy. He is coordinating complex research projects with multidisciplinary teams for more than 25 years in Europe, Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and Pacific coastal countries, in collaboration with national research institutions and universities, and a close link with policy bodies. He has authored and co-authored about 350 journal articles, book chapters, research reports, consultancy reports, and more. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to learn more about your research. So just to get started, could you briefly introduce yourself and also explain your research within the field of plastic pollution?
Yes, so I'm Pierre Failler, so I'm a professor of economics at the University of Portsmouth. So we have been involved in plastic pollution through, we can say, many ways. That's many from the policy point of view or angle, we can say. So we have recently published with Gianluca Ferraro a paper, on the policy, regarding the marine pollution, as we found out that there were some missing elements or missing points, in the international legislation.
Mm-hmm. And I was really interested in your research surrounding like the global policies on plastic pollution. So I was wondering if you could just give like a brief overview about some of the current global policies that are currently in place for dealing with plastic pollution.
Yeah, so the plastic pollution is not something new. I mean, we can hear a lot in the media about plastic pollution today, but if we look at the legislation, it goes back to 1972, with the first convention, which is the London Convention on the prevention of marine pollution, mainly from dumping waste, and other, matters, from boats, mainly from vessels. That's the first convention that we have. So the idea of the convention was really to eliminate all the sources of plastic pollutions, but mainly, we can see from the sea sources. After that, we have a series of other conventions. The second important one is the MARPOL, and especially the Annex 5, which specifically prohibits, the disposal of plastic into the oceans. So that's something important. And quite surprisingly, in the Bahamas, for example, you have currently a project, working on this for the cruise industry. So it's still that, despite the fact that this goes back to 1973, the issue is still not sorted out. Okay, and that's in the Bahamas. It's with the support of the Inter-American Development Bank. Okay, and after we have there's quite some silence, for about more than 20, 30 years, and we go in the beginning of the 2010s, especially 2011, with the Honolulu strategy that aim to improve the cooperation, to prevent land-based plastic debris from entering the oceans. And that's the first one, that specifically deals, with something which is not only, we can say, ocean sources for the plastic pollution. So that's quite an important strategy. And after, you have a series of initiative of resolutions. You have the G7, the G20s, to combat the marine litter in 2015, the Ocean Plastic Charter 2018, etc., etc. Okay, so there's quite a long list that you can find, on the UN UN Environment website, and I think we should mention at least, the one on the, with the Sustainable Development Goals, especially the SDG 14, the target 1, that calls, for preventing and significantly reducing marine pollution at all kinds, especially or particularly from land-based activities. So overall, there was we moved from the trying to address, the pollution coming from the sea itself to the sea, to addressing, the pollution coming from the land base, to the sea, which is much more important, than the sea to sea pollution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if I remember correctly, the paper that you wrote specifically on these sorts of global policies was focusing on some of the major problems with these policies and then the ensuing areas of improvement. So I was wondering, just once again, like brief overview, what have been some of the major problems with these global policies? And like, why do you think that's the case? It's kind of a big question, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's a few problems. I think the first key problem is the fact that there's quite a lack of enforcement or even a lack of application of of these policies. I think we can talk about this later, but the enforcement is something important. And I mean, as we can see, we still have a lot of dumping, from vessels. We still have a lot of, even, despite the Honolulu Convention, we still have a lot of land-based pollutions. So lack of application and lack of enforcement is something, that came first. Uh, Despite this, we can say from the sea to sea pollution, there's a huge improvement have been done, over the last, yeah, we can say decades, and we can take, the example of the pollution from the fuel oil pollution, on that we can. I mean, when I was kids in Brittany, for instance, every time you go to the beach, you had a lot of, you can see a lot of fuel oil, on the rocks. And I was in Brittany this summer. There is no fuel oil on the rocks at all. So it means that when you are able to enforce, the policy to first to implement, but also to enforce, you achieve, some tangible results. So this is something which is missing at the moment, with the plastic pollution.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really a question of enforcement capacity, and we can take them. I was bringing the example of France, but Canada has a very good, policy, on this for the oil spills and things like that. So when you have the enforcement capacity, things are possible, and especially with now, with the remote sensing tracking system, so you can see, who is polluting. That's for the first one. Second one is about there's a few shortcomings, we can say, in the existing international policy framework. I think the first one is about it's still, despite the Honolulu Convention, it's still focused on the sea-based sources for marine pollution. So a lot have been done, for the, the ghost fishing gears and things like this. But the major problem is from the land-based pollution. So that's a very important. So the development of international policy has been, we can say, more advanced for ocean-based and land-based source, and for the plastic, the case of the plastic litter, it was easier, to create a relatively effective system from preventing pollution from ships than from land base. At the moment, we are really, really, trying to address this issue. Okay. The other one is up to now, it was just like a soft law instrument that have been implemented. So there were no obligation of compliance and no obligation to show, results as well. So that was another problem. And then maybe the last one is the fragmentation of the existing international regulatory framework. Okay, so we have, I think I didn't mention all the instruments, but there's a lot of instruments between the international to the regional to the national ones. So there's a fragmentation here, which is quite difficult, to, I think, for everybody to understand, and to have a global picture. So that's this patchwork, we can say, in marine pollution, it creates difficulties, for implementations. And we can say that the last point, is that we can say somehow, some inapplicability of the framework of the law of the sea, to address the current situation. And I think this is becoming more and more evident with the climate change issues, such as acidification of the oceans or coastal erosions, mainly due to the intensification of storm of sea level rise that countries, mainly in the south, are facing while they are not or little contributing to, we can say, climate change issues. Okay, so we can see that the 12 miles, the 200 miles reduction tools, are not relevant to deal, with the problem we are facing today. which require a new set of jurisdiction tools, and including, the one that can encapsulate the principle of polluter, or we can say, polluting countries, up to the polluter countries. So that's kind of things that we need to put in place, like to have some compensatory schemes, which is missing at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot of really important issues, but there's also so many, which is means there's a lot of more progress that needs to be made in this area as well.
Yes, yeah. Just to complete on that thing, I think one of the key things is that the externalities, especially from land-based, plastic pollution is not taken into account. Okay, so that should be, yes, definitely, on board. I just give you the example of the Indian Ocean where we are working at the moment. So the key emitting countries like India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, don't compensate, small islands countries, like Mauritius, Seychelles, for all the plastics that is coming on their shores. Okay. So that's, I don't want to say that, that Mauritius or Seychelles are not throwing plastic, on the sea, but compared to what is coming from the other countries, it's negligible.
Yeah, and earlier you were just talking about how specifically there wasn't this sort of binding agreement, which sort of like held these countries liable to actually implementing the policies. And so I wanted to actually ask you, like in your work, you mentioned this implementation of some new legally binding international agreement, which was, you said like a lot of scholars support this idea. And so I was wondering if you agree with this sort of proposal, and if this was actually implemented, what would that entail?
We need to think in two ways. I mean, we need to first to improve what's the existing, and secondly think about something a bit better, So that's the things. And I think today, many scholars believe that most institutional challenges in marine plastic governance can be solved, by a new legally binding, we can say, international agreements. And we can take the example, of the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement, including, maybe including the emission trading system, within the Paris Agreement that can be, maybe put in place for the plastic, for the time we are sorting out, the discharge of plastic in the sea. But that that kind of things can be used, as to guide, the elaboration of a new legally binding agreements. That's the idea. But it needs to be to integrate, and like some real compensation scheme, which is at the moment, that will be a key issue there. Okay. So that's one way to go, and it's really the fact that such treaty, is needed to drive, policy change at both international and national level. So at the international one, this such an instrument, could improve, synergies among the existing initiatives, and at the national level one, it could promote the reforms on the current system, both production, consumption, and also, the waste, the way, the plastic waste is managed. So more or less it goes hand to hand with the current promotion of the circular economy principle in countries, including in developing countries. But at the same time, we cannot just think about, developing a new instrument or dreaming about this, without improving, the current ones. And for that, the formulation of a new legally binding instruments will take time. Okay, so for that, we really need, to try to promote, the improvement of the existing instrument, and especially the implementation of these existing instruments. That's so. I think overall, in this context, the possible approach, it's to follow double track, pursuing, an element among, the existing instruments in the short term, while starting discussions, for the development of global treaty on plastic.
Mm-hmm. And also, just for, I guess, clarification, I was wondering, like, what are the barriers right now that are preventing us from implementing these sorts of like international agreements?
Well, you have a set of barriers, but I think there's a few, we can say, explanatory factors, about why, the international agreements, which that have been developed, for at least 5 decades now, why they're not implementing or fully implementing. So I think, in a limited space, we can group this factor into three categories. I think the first one is about the design of the contents of the policy defined by international agreements. Second one will be mainly about, I think, is mainly about the oppositions from stakeholders that such a change can generate. And third one is, and I think is quite important for third countries, is about the resource allocation or the resource availability. I think for the first one, there are two dimensions. I think that are relevant. So the first one is about the clarity and the feasibility of the contents of international instruments. I think with regard to clarity, I think the fragmentation, as we mentioned, earlier, doesn't help, the clarity. That's one key issue. You have too many instruments and too many overlappings between the instruments. So that creates, some we can say some visibility problems. Regard to the feasibility, one point that needs to be stressed, and especially for the developing countries, is we can say that the focus is on the economic growth. Okay, so everything which is not, on this agenda is not regarded as a priority. Okay, so that's one of the key things that we need to have in mind. So more or less, you can promote a lot of things. You can promote, the wise use of plastic, the waste, the recycling, etc. As long as it doesn't fit, with the development process, it is not, taken on board, with consideration. And I saw that, like in Bangladesh, many years ago. It changed at the moment, but many years ago, the plastic pollution was not considered as a problem itself. What was important was the economic growth and to achieve the 7% growth every year of the GDP. So we can say that the first factor, and the second one, is about, we can say that any change, in the content of the policy, affects, the distribution of costs and benefits among the stakeholders. So this produce conflict with whose, intensify may vary, to the degree of change pursued. Okay, so you can, in a short word, think very quickly, think that many stakeholders or many people, especially plastic producers or importers, are not fully favorable, of any change in the legislation that will add, cost to their production system or their distribution system. And the last one is mainly about having, the resourcing. So it's not about only having the money, but it's also having, the infrastructure, having the capacities, the people, also the political leadership, which is not always, available in countries. Okay, so that's one of the key issues in developing countries that we have at the moment and we are facing at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I just complete, with some solutions, that can be developed, for addressing this issue. I think that the first one is about the simplification of the policy design and policy framework, governing, this plastic, issue. Second one is mainly about the engagement of stakeholders in the formulation and the implementation of international obligations. Okay, stakeholders are very often, left apart, so they are not fully involved right from the beginning, So after it's very difficult, to impose them, some new regulations. And after is about the resources. So resources should be channeled, and not only resources, but human and technological expertise to be channeled, to countries that are in a developing stage, And as I think the last solution is to use, as long as possible, example, that have been successfully implemented in countries. So, and you can find examples in many places, not only in developed countries, but also in the southern part of the world.
Mm-hmm. And just one more major topic which I wanted to talk about,
Mm-hmm.
with regards to your research in particular. I know part of your study actually focused on science and the role that science plays in international policy. So I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on that, because I know, at least personally as well, I'm not too familiar with how all that works.
Yeah. I think that science plays, a key role, because it's the one which is able, to provide the current state of play, about the plastic. So I give you, and also, provide forecast and predict the consequences, of plastic pollution on biodiversity, for instance. Just to give you an example, in the Indian Ocean, you have a very good network of, or we can say, observatory system, developed under the umbrella of UNESCO, and with the help of many states around, Australia, United States, France, many other countries, India. But it was not used until now, for any, we can say, plastic pollution research. But this is something that is on the way, to be done. Okay, and so we shall use, not only the we can say the buoy, that are recording, the waves high, the temperature, etc., the salinity. Now, to also look at, the way, plastics are moving, through the Indian Ocean. So that's quite important because it will help, to shape the legislation. Okay. But the key issue with science is that science on its own, it's good, but it's not enough. So it needs to be translated into words or sentences that the population, everybody can understand. So that's one of the key challenges at the moment. The other key challenge is to bring evidences about the fact that if you don't do anything, that will be, the consequences. We have been working, for instance, of the cost of policy inactions in the Caribbean due to the loss of tourism revenue. So when you work on this, you bring some tangible, results to the policy in order that to alert them and to tell them, okay, there's a change that needs to be done here, in order to keep the system sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so, well, I guess obviously like science has been playing an important role. So it's more so just like the implementation of how we can use these findings to actually help
Yes.
us. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, last question for today, but this is sort of looking at just like a wider scope of the plastic pollution problem as a whole. So I was wondering, just in general, what are some other promising areas apart from policy that people should be working on to sort of tackle the plastic pollution problem?
Yeah, there's many areas, but I think if we make it short, I think the first one is about building awareness, in society through education program, information campaigns, involvement, like the citizen science. So a lot of things that can be done, just to make the people aware of, or fully aware of the problem. Okay. For instance, if we, at the moment, people are, we can say, aware of the problem of the macroplastics. Okay, because you can see it. You can see it on the shores. You can see it on the beach. But the tiny part of plastic, the microplastics, nobody more or less is aware of this. And this, tiny bits of plastic are creating more problem than the big ones. Okay. So awareness is one of the key things. The second one maybe is about developing, new technologies, and people are working on this new technology and techniques, to replace and produce less plastic, and also to better manage, and that goes alongside, we can say, with the implementation of the circular economy. Okay, with I think it's the 4R about reduce, reuse, and I always forgot the two other others, that are not only implementing in Europe, United States, or Japan, but also, in developing countries. Today, I think the Indian Ocean Commission, is promoting the circular economy, and that is starting, to get more and more interest from countries, especially the small islands countries. And I think that will benefit, the countries to develop and to base, their developments, on this principle. Okay. The other one, is about really promoting, voluntary mechanisms for the industry. and we can follow, what has been done, for the climate change. For instance, many big companies, are advertise that they are becoming carbon neutral or even negative, and some companies like tires company, companies are producing tires in Europe, are becoming, like we can say plastic free, so there's a lot of things to do, and I think but the key thing is that stakeholders are the key people, to enroll, in this process, because they are the one that will make, the policy or force the policy to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think those are definitely some really major areas which a lot of people are working on, but they're also super important. But overall, thank you so much for joining me today. This was a really insightful conversation, and it was really interesting to learn about the policy side of the plastic pollution problem. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Yvonne.